And so now we are a bit closer and we can already see our goal. And I was just going to turn to show it when it's open. So let's get across. And the lighting at this time is really good because it's good enough to show my face while still lighting the surroundings. So this is the Euromast Tower. It's by a quite beautiful park. I wish I had had time to walk on it during the day, but unfortunately, like I said, all time is limited. And talking once again about the conference, while we go on our way there, I'm not sure what I'm going to get hate for this, but of the talks I watched, perhaps I could have chosen the talks better, or perhaps not, but of some of the talks I watched, one of the things that bothered me is that too many people were talking too much about like ethics and inclusion and how it should be done in a humane way, and not that much about the technology. I mean, look, I think this is Erasmus Hospital. If I'm not mistaken, this must be the largest hospital in the city. Another place I would love to have visited, but it's a bit harder. I would very likely need to obtain authorization first, and I didn't have time for it. Perhaps if my channel grows and I get like 1 million subscribers, then maybe I'll get to a point where I can just travel to visit hospitals and actually get access to filming them, because that's another point. There is a large difference between visiting a hospital and actually being allowed to film there. So who knows, perhaps someday if the channel grows, then. And what I was talking about, the content of the lectures, again, I'm not saying that none of the lectures were interesting or showcased products. Of course they were, but the way I see it, perhaps the greatest advantage of having an in-person event that is not just watching over the internet is the ability to demonstrate things, to be able to show people what you are actually developing. And this is done a lot at the stands. The stands really do this well, really do their part. However, when it comes to like discussing ethics or something like that, I'm not saying ethics are not important. I am a medical doctor, but I think we should not miss the forest for the trees. It's really important that we should focus on having a technology before worrying about regulating the technology. People are discussing like this needs to be regulated. I'm not inventing this, I heard this sort of thing at a conference, and this technology needs to be regulated. And that's before we even have it like ready. What exactly are you trying to regulate? My point is, of course, ethics is important. I think we should all agree, for example, that you shouldn't initiate violence against other people unprovoked. So no one should just like go and hit someone else in the street. That's wrong. That's an example of very plausible ethics that's unlikely to cause any debate. On the other hand, there is a tendency of using ethics as an euphemism for red tape. Whenever you just want to make sure something, I'm not to show the Euromast while I talk. Whenever you want to make sure that something does not happen, or does not happen in a way that you don't want, you call it unethical and then try to create as much red tape around it, alleging that it's like the more humane solution or the more ethical solution. How do I cross this? And I think that really needs to be taken into account. Like I said, I don't advocate, for example, violence. That is unethical. I believe there is very little debate about that. But we should first focus on developing the technology and later on dealing on how to use it. So I believe that's something that could vastly improve some of the talks if we could focus a bit more on the products. And regarding the stands are very interesting, and we get to see a lot of that. The only problem I have with them, I'm not sure what call it a problem, is that sometimes it's really hard for someone, especially someone who is not from the area like me, to actually understand what each company does and what each place is. Sometimes you just go to pass in front of a stand and it's written like there, let me see a random name like here. Let me read something on the street. It's like the Euromast, like the Euromast experience, the Euromast VR experience. And you're like, great, what does that mean? Is that like healthcare? Is that tourism? Do you do hardware, software? Are you a consulting firm? It's sometimes really hard to understand what the firm does. So you often end up meeting most companies and most people based on acquaintances or indications. You go to someone's talk and then they tell you, for example, hey, did you check stand 28? And you're like, oh, no, I didn't. What do they do? And they're like, well, they do in healthcare. Oh, I could have really benefited if they had written that very large on top of the stand. And so, but this is my first non-medical conference. So to some degree there's also a lot I have to learn here. And I just captured the lights going on at this very moment. So perhaps I'm just a bit inexperienced. But, and I'm not from this area, I'm not from IT. My background is medicine. But I really think they could have benefited from making it clearer what each company does. Usually have to press this button to cross the street. Almost every significant crossing has them. Here a mess behind me and it's open. Most people here, at least in Rotterdam, which is the city I've been to yet, usually wait to cross even if there are no cars coming. And also I believe this is not exactly news to anyone, but the Dutch really take their bikes seriously. So there are like bike paths everywhere, literally in all places. And they don't use their bike paths for walking, they don't use their bike paths for running. They like really taking biking seriously. You see a lot of bikes waiting to cross, and if you're just walking by the street, when you're going to cross, you need to pay attention not only if there's some car coming, but also if there are bikes coming, because that is a real worry. That is something that really happens. Look both sides for cars and both sides for bikes. I was looking at the park here. It's still beautiful at night. Maybe if it's still open, if there's nothing that really closes, I'll go on a walk after dinner. Well, if I dine up there. If I don't, then after I come down, and then I'll go dine at my hotel or something. Of course, I will never do something like this in Brazil, for example. I'm not suicidal. But again, literally, I am alone, holding basically an expensive selfie with my phone, walking on the street. So if this were many other countries, then I would have lost both my phone and my wallet, and perhaps even my coat, a long while ago. Here this isn't much of a concern, so in the same way, I think it's unlikely the night visit to the park will be a significant problem. And here we have the basis of it, and it goes down that way. And perhaps we can talk a bit about this city and its architecture and boroughs once we get up there. Better elevator. Oh, but the view is quite good. It's the great city of Rotterdam, the second largest. Here, the Erasmus Medical Center, the largest medical center in the city. This is literally an elevator inside the tower.